Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? I hope your morning started out better than ours. Karen and I were heading this way at 6 a.m. and blew a tire. Woo! Nothing says money like blowing tires, right? So, yeah, that's what my Sunday afternoon is going to be all about. But we're glad that you didn't blow a tire and you showed up today. So, thank you for being a part of the journey this morning. We have a photo up here on the screen. You might know this guy. This is M. Night Shyamalan. He is a writer and director of movies. And you might know some of his more popular movies like Unbreakable, The Village, Signs, The Sixth Sense, right? You probably know those. You probably have tried to ignore, he's had some big stinkers out there. So we're not going to talk about those. But if you're familiar with his movies, you kind of know the way that these movies play out. You're watching it, and as you're watching it, you're starting to put all these pieces together, like you would in any movie, right? You're putting all these pieces together. You think you've sort of figured out the ending, but what he's known for is that right about the moment that you know the ending in your mind, boom, it's a total change, totally throws you off, and the ending is nothing like you expected to see. Well, life is kind of like that too, right? We kind of have these ideas of what life is supposed to look like and these expectations of it. But the reality, many times, is much different than those expectations. But we carry these expectations into our life. We have expectations, in fact, in every area of our life. We have expectations when it comes to getting married, expectations of having a kid or buying that first house, expectations to maybe become the VP of the company you work for, expectations to finish your PhD, expectations to retire at 55. We all carry in life expectations. In fact, I think one of the areas that we carry a lot of expectations are marriage. Right? If you're married, you know going into your marriage, you had a lot of expectations for it. If you're not married, let us go ahead and tell you that when you decide it's time to get married, you're going to carry a lot of expectations into that marriage. But let me talk about those expectations just for a moment. Now, hear me out. I'm going to do some stereotyping, okay? So here's what I need you to do is I need you to just have a lot of grace. If you don't like what I say, remember, this is a disclaimer. And if you really don't like what I say, just send an email to joel@thejourneynova.org. He loves dealing with problems, so just send him an email, okay? Stereotyping. So let's think about this. Marriage, okay? Ladies, maybe your expectation of marriage was the picket fence, open-air concept house, shiplap on every single wall in that house, maybe great vacations, a plump bank account, husband with the six-pack abs, right? Maybe for you, ladies, the biggest thing is you're looking forward to this husband that when you sit down on the couch beside him, you're like, hey, I need to talk. And you don't get a from him, right? And instead of he puts his phone down, he turns off the TV and he stares at you and he looks in your eyes. And he's like, share with me whatever is deep down, honey. Just share those words. And she does. And guys, you're just like, I feel you. I'm there with you. Just keep talking. And you just feel this bond. Maybe that's the expectation, ladies, you have of marriage, right? Stereotyping. But guys, we have expectations too. And it's a really short list. It's like two things. Maybe your expectations are dinner on the table, meat and potatoes, because that's what mom always did for you. And then the other part is just all about intimacy, right? And lots of intimacy. So, guys, you kind of go into marriage and you have these expectations of what marriage is going to be like. But what's the deal with marriage? If you're married, you understand there are expectations, and then there is the reality of marriage. Those great vacations, guess where you're going? In-laws' house for a week. That plump bank account is full of overdraft charges. That husband with the expectation of six-pack abs, oh, it's a keg these days, right? And for dudes, those intimate moments, she comes out of the bathroom, baggy sweatpants, oversized t-shirt, this face mask on, and it screams, do not look at me, do not talk to me, don't even think about, do not even touch me, right? Because there's these expectations that we have, but then there's the reality of marriage. And again, I am very much stereotyping here. But no matter whether it's marriage or any other relationship or the work we do, our family or our homes, all of us bring into those areas these expectations that we have. But yet there's the reality of life. And it's not just in these things like relationships and our stuff and our jobs that we have these expectations. We also have these expectations when it comes to Jesus. And so that's why over the next 3 weeks, we're going to talk about this Easter story, right? These 3 days. Now, you might be asking yourself, why are we calling it 3 days? Well, there are 3 days, as the bumper said, that changed the world. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of, again, what we call the Easter story. And as you think about that weekend, like there's so many expectations on Jesus. They're brought about disappointment and disillusionment and doubt and questions, but in the end, there's this incredible, incredible celebration that takes place. And so we're going to talk about those 3 days over the next few weeks in this series. But today, we're going to begin by looking at the expectations on Jesus. And so we're going to start with that Friday. But to talk about that Friday, I actually want to go back 5 days. I want to go back to the Sunday previous to that Friday. In Luke chapter 19, we find Jesus is heading into Jerusalem. He's there for the Passover festival. And he knows this is it for him, right? He knows that this is the week, that things are going to turn south, and that he's going to die. He knows this. Well, he goes to a couple of his disciples, like, hey guys, can you go to that town? There's a donkey there. I want you to go pick up that donkey and bring it back because I've got use of it. And so that leads us into Luke chapter 19, starting with verse 35. Here's what it says. So they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their garments over it for him to ride on. As he rode along, the crowds spread out their garments on the road ahead of him. When he reached the place where the road started down the Mount of Olives, all his followers began to shout and sing as they walked along, praising God for all the wonderful miracles they had seen. Like for 3 years, people had listened to him teach. They had watched him do these incredible miracles. They had experienced compassion from Jesus. I mean, he had a reputation like no other person had, but they also saw something a little more in him. They began to think back to those prophecies that they had heard as kids, that they had been taught for years, and they began to see him as this king, this Messiah to come. One of those prophecies we see in Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9. Here's what it says. Rejoice, O people of Zion. Shout in triumph, O people of Jerusalem. Look, your king is coming to you. He is righteous and victorious, yet he's humble, riding on a donkey, riding on a donkey's colt. For hundreds of years, the Israelites had heard these prophecies over and over again that this Messiah was coming. And as this Messiah came into Jerusalem, this Messiah would be riding a donkey. So this is something they have been waiting on their whole lives, but for generations. They've been waiting for this one moment. And now here's this prophet, this teacher, this miracle worker who is coming into Jerusalem on this donkey. So they begin to connect the dots. They begin to put all this together. And as they do this, they're like, this is it. This is the moment that we're going to take over our great city again. This is the person who's going to come in and we're going to take over our land again. This is the person who's going to be the king and sit on this throne for us. And so there's all these expectations they have on Jesus. So here in Luke, Jesus is coming into Jerusalem, and the crowds see him, and they're also there for the Passover feast, the Passover festival. The Passover festival was connected back to 1,500 years earlier when God used Moses to lead the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt to their freedom. And so as these Israelites on this particular day with Jesus, as they see him coming in, as they are experiencing all this, because of my car. As they see all this, they're thinking in their minds, hey, we're going to be free once again. And this is the ultimate freedom we've been waiting for. And so how do they treat Jesus as he enters in? The Oscars were last Sunday night. I didn't watch it, haven't watched it in a long time, but I know there's the red carpet right before, right? And there's literally a red carpet. And these celebrities come in, and they walk the red carpet, and they're taking photos, and they're doing these little short interviews, and they're showing all the great outfits that they have on, all that kind of fun stuff. And as I think about that, that's kind of what Jesus is getting here. He's getting the red carpet treatment. Because the people, as Jesus is coming into Jerusalem, they're taking off their coats, and they're putting them on the ground. They're taking these palm branches, and they're putting them on the ground. They were doing these things. They were only fit for a king. They were only fit for royalty. And so they're saying, hey, Jesus, you are the Messiah. You are the expected king that we have been waiting for. And in fact, not only are they taking this action, they start to sing. In Luke chapter 19, verse 38, it says, blessings on the king who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest heaven. We have any Virginia Tech Hokie fans in here? Wow. Seriously? We had one in the first service, so this is wonderful. Anyway, I'm kidding. I actually like Virginia Tech. But every time I kind of read this passage and I think about what's happening here, it takes me to a Virginia Tech football game. If you've ever seen those on TV, there's 70,000 people. The football team's getting ready to come into the stadium, and everybody starts jumping up and down, right? And then from the loudspeakers, Enter Sandman from Metallica is just blasting. Now, I got to experience this one time a few years back. It's the scariest thing I've ever been a part of in my entire life. Because if you haven't been there before, like, literally, the stadium is moving, right? And you're glad that part of what they do there is they're an engineering school, I think, right? So, I mean, because it really is scary. I mean, I know the whole seismic thing that happens there, and there's like a little earthquake. It's an amazing experience, and it's a scary experience, too. Well, as I kind of, and this might be my warped mind, as I think about this story right here, I kind of go to that moment of the football game where these people are jumping up and down. They're jumping up and down because the king is coming into the city of Jerusalem riding this donkey. And they're singing this song. Maybe it was to Enter Sandman. I don't know if it was or not. Metallica's not that old, but they're old. But like they're screaming and yelling and calling out Jesus' name. I mean, they are into this moment because these expectations they have on Jesus are just so big. But it's not just the crowd. His disciples actually have these exact same expectations for him. Probably a couple of days before Jesus goes into Jerusalem, he's having a conversation with two of his disciples. We read this in Mark chapter 10, verse 35. It said, then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came over and spoke to him. Teacher, they said, we want you to do us a favor. What's your request? He asked. They replied, when you sit on your glorious throne, we want to sit in places of honor next to you, one on your right and the other on your left. Jesus has been with these guys for 3+ years. Jesus has been preaching and talking and teaching them this theme of what's getting ready to happen, these actions that are going to take place on this particular week. And yet, what are these guys asking for? They're saying, Jesus, when you go into Jerusalem, when you lead this revolution, when you take over this great city, when you take over this great land, when you sit on your throne, man, we want positions of power there in your cabinet. Now, why are they asking this? Why are they saying this to Jesus? Why is this the request they have? Because their expectations of Jesus are really not any different than the rest of the Israelites. Well, over the next few days, we move from Sunday, we're going into Friday. These expectations for Jesus keep growing. And what does Jesus do that week? He keeps teaching, he keeps interacting with people, he keeps talking about this future to come. He eats the last meal with his disciples. And then he's arrested, then he's tried, and then he's sentenced to death. 5 days earlier, they come into this town and they're thinking, this is it. This is the king. This is the Messiah. This is the royalty. This is our place. This is our land and our city. And here we are on this Friday, and everything comes crashing down. Those expectations were not met. Look at John chapter 19, verse 16. So they took Jesus away, Carrying the cross by himself, he went to the place called Place of the Skull, in Hebrew Golgotha, where they nailed him to the cross. 2 others were crucified with him, one on either side, with Jesus between them. And Pilate posted a sign on the cross that read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Once again, 5 days earlier, he comes in as this king to come. And now this king to be is being executed on a cross. But this is not the way things were supposed to happen. Look at Luke 23, verse 44. By this time it was about noon, and darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock. The light from the sun was gone. And suddenly the curtain in the sanctuary of the temple was torn down the middle. Then Jesus shouted, Father, I entrust my spirit into your hands. And with those words, he breathed his last. This revolutionary leader, this king to be, is now gone. And how do they respond to the reality that takes place? It was much different than the expectations they had. Look at Luke 23, verse 48. And when all the crowd that came to see the crucifixion saw what had happened, they went home in deep sorrow. Here's the king, the Messiah, that was there to fulfill these prophecies, to take over this land, to take over this kingdom, to be this king. And yet the reality of what they were experiencing was so different. And how did they leave? It says deep sorrow. Not just a little sorrow, not just a tear, but deep sorrow, deep hurt, deep doubt and confusion and disappointment and brokenness. Probably not much different than many of us feel when it comes to the expectations that we have of Jesus too. In fact, let me just take a moment, just kind of share with you some popular expectations that people have of Jesus. This may be some that you have, and there's way more than this, but let me just kind of share a few with you. Maybe you're someone that expects if you follow Jesus, you'll enjoy a pain-free life. Like, I don't know where this came from, but there's like this idea that if you really are following Jesus, like you'll experience no pain. Your relationships are going to be amazing. Your health will always be at its best. Your mental health will always be perfect. I mean, everything about you is going to be great because you fully follow Jesus. And if you don't, right, if you experience pain, and I don't know if these are well-meaning Christians or not, so forgive me, but someone may say to you, well, maybe your faith just isn't where it's supposed to be. Like the thing you're going through right now is because your faith isn't strong enough. You're not praying enough. Like there's nothing in Scripture that says that. Sorry, it's not theologically sound. There's nothing that says, hey, if you follow Jesus, your life is going to be amazing and wonderful and awesome. In fact, it says, if you follow Jesus, guess what? It actually might be harder. Yay! Woo! I don't want to follow Jesus now because of that, right? We have this idea that there's this pain-free life, and so we kind of think that if I follow Jesus, then this is what my life is going to be like. But we don't see that anywhere in Scripture, and that's not what Jesus came to do. Another one, you expect Jesus to be your genie in a bottle. What do you want? You want that promotion? You want that raise? You want that house? You want that girlfriend? Right? Whatever it is that you want, you just grab your Jesus genie bottle and you rub it, and Jesus pops out. It's like, I'm going to grant you a wish. What would you like to wish for? You're like, oh, here's what I want. And Jesus says, hey, no problem at all. I'll take care of that for you. Again, it's not in Scripture anywhere. Jesus isn't your ATM machine. Like, I need $1,000. And poof, it just shows up because you rub the genie bottle and there he came. And now you're good to go. That's not how Jesus works. And yet, for some of us, we think that's the way Jesus is. We think if we say, hey, Jesus, this is what I need. Man, I need to get this new car. I need to buy this brand new house. I need you to make this happen. Jesus says, you pray and you focus on me. I'll give you what you need. And you know what? When he says that prayer, it's not really about getting the new car and the promotion and the education. It's about your spiritual soul. It's about who you are spiritually. And yet many of us, we have this expectation that Jesus is sort of this genie in a bottle that we just say to Jesus, this is what I need done, and Jesus takes care of that and gives us any wish that we want granted. Again, that's not the reality of Jesus. But then probably one of my favorite is you expect Jesus to give you instant answers. This is hard because we talk about if you're a follower of Christ, that one of the things that you have got to learn to do or to be good at is to pray, right? That doesn't mean you have to have great prayers. It just means that you're a person of prayer, that throughout your day, you're just saying prayers. You're trying to connect with God. And yeah, we can ask for stuff in that, like, hey, God, I need help with this relationship or this going. We can pray for that. But our expectation too often is that when we pray that, God, it's Monday, it's 10 a.m. If you could take care of this by 5 p.m. today before I go home, that'd be wonderful, right? I don't want to have to deal with this when I get home. And if you can't do that, then maybe by the end of business on Friday. That would be even great. I would really love to have a great weekend. And so we pray these prayers of these things that are going on in our life, and our expectation is that we're going to get answers to those prayers right here and now. 2 weeks pass. I'm trying to think, well, what's going on? Why isn't my prayer answered? 2 months pass. Hey, did God even listen to that prayer? Because I've been praying this prayer for 2 months and nothing's going on here. 2 years pass. You're still praying the same prayer. At that point, you may get to this place of just saying, I don't even know if I believe in God anymore. Why is that? Because we have this idea, we have this expectation that when we pray, that those answers should come instantaneously. The reality, many times, is so different. We have these expectations for Jesus, and the reality of Jesus is different than those expectations. What are the expectations you have for Jesus? Like if you think about your life right now, what are the expectations you have for Jesus? Because every single one of us have expectations of Jesus. Even if we don't follow Jesus, we have an expectation of Jesus of some sort. Right? There's these expectations that we have of Jesus. Like you got a problem, call Jesus. Jesus will come and fix it. You got some sort of issue, text Jesus. You know what? Jesus will be there. He will take care of that issue for you. You got some wants? You know what you need to do? Put it in written form. Email Jesus, and Jesus will respond in the next 24 hours, and you'll get exactly what you want. This is kind of the way we see our lives, which means we're not really any different than the Israelites. That we have these expectations of Jesus to help me with my disease, to help me win the lottery, to give me these 3 wishes. And Jesus says, that is not why I am here. I didn't come to save you from the Romans. I didn't come to take over the city. I didn't come to give you your land back. I didn't come to answer your 3 wishes. I didn't come to give you instantaneous answers to the prayers that you have. Jesus says, I came to give you something much bigger and better than any of that. I came to not fix stuff for you. I came to give you something. I came to give you peace and hope and life. See, the reality of Jesus is much different than the expectations that so many of us have on Jesus. They're very different than the expectations that we have for Jesus. And so when our expectations of Jesus are high and not even healthy, we're like these people that when Jesus is crucified, we fall into that same trap, right? When the things we expect Jesus to do don't happen, we become disappointed and we become upset and we become sad and we feel broken and we have deep sorrow because this Jesus that we've kind of built in our minds and the expectations we have of this Jesus is not the reality of who Jesus truly is. And that is the beauty of Easter. That's the beauty of Easter. That it's not about our expectations. It is about the reality of what Jesus did for you and for me. Because here's what Jesus does. Jesus gives us something much greater to hold on to. Before we moved here in 2016, for me to come on staff here at The Journey, we lived down in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, who got beat by the NC State Wolfpack yesterday. Anybody last night? Anybody care? Yeah, right. So I took my middle daughter to the game last night, and we had a great time. It was a good father-daughter thing, but it was. I don't like either team, but it was fun to watch NC State beat Carolina. Anyway, we lived in Chapel Hill for 7 years. We planted a church there, and a couple of buddies that I grew up with, they were brothers, Chris and David. Their dad passed away, and so I drove from Chapel Hill, where we were living, to Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where I grew up, for this funeral. And I'm in there in the church that day. I'm sitting in my seat and just there to support these guys. Well, Chris gets up to give part of his eulogy, and he's talking about his dad. And he talks specifically about the moment that he and his mom found out together with their dad from the doctor that his dad was dying. He had a rare form of cancer. It took his life at the age of 65, so he died young. But on this particular day, they're there in the doctor's office. The doctor gives this prognosis to Chris's dad, and Chris's dad tells his mom and Chris, he says these words. He says, "For me, this is a win-win situation." At the funeral that day, Chris said, "I don't think I've ever been that angry at my father, ever." He said, "How can my dad say that? He's got this rare form of cancer. He's going to die shortly because this cancer eats through your body so quickly." He said, not only that, but he's going to leave me and my brother and my family and my mom. He's not going to be here anymore. I'll never have another conversation with him when he passes away. He's like, how can my dad say that? Chris's mom and Chris were kind of questioning their dad or his dad about what he had said. And here's how Chris's dad followed up with that. He said, "I know this is going to be tough on you all, but this is a win-win for me. If I live, it's a miracle. I get more time on earth with you. Many people get to hear the story of a miracle from God." He says, "If I die, I get to be with Jesus." He says, "I don't lose either way." I heard Chris telling that story, and I was with Chris. I'm like, how can you say this? How can you say this is a win-win? I mean, it makes you question God. It makes you question life. It makes you question your faith. You're going to leave your boys, and you're going to leave their families and their grandkids and your wife. I mean, how can you say that this is a win-win situation for you? And here's how this was a win-win. Chris's dad had no expectations of Jesus. He didn't expect Jesus to heal him. Does that mean he didn't pray for it? No, I'm sure he prayed for it. But the expectation wasn't that Jesus would heal him of this cancer so this miracle could take place and so he could tell everybody about God. Now, that wasn't his expectation. See, what he did is he lived in the reality of Jesus in that moment. And he said, hey, if I live, the reality is Jesus is a miracle worker. And if I die, the reality is I get to spend the rest of my life with Jesus. For me, this is a win-win. I don't know what your expectations of Jesus might be. Maybe it's to be a miracle worker, a healer, a doctor. Maybe your expectations are of Jesus to be this earthly king or a reformer or a part of a political party. Maybe your expectations of Jesus are way out of debt or so you can retire early or so the relationships you have can be unbroken and perfect. But if you think about that too many times, those expectations are my expectations of Jesus and not the reality of who Jesus is. Jesus did not come to be a fixer. Jesus came to be a giver of hope and of peace and of life. And in the end, our expectations are not the reality of who Jesus came to be. Again, that's the beauty of the Easter story. Because the day before he was crucified, there were so many different expectations that the people had for Jesus. But here it is, it's Friday, and what's happening? He's saying his last words. Jesus is praying his last prayer. Jesus is breathing his last breath, and then he's dead, and he's gone. And you know what happens to those expectations? They don't any longer exist. It's Friday, but Sunday's coming. It's Friday for them. They don't know what's coming for them, but we do. Sunday is coming. If you were in their position, how would you have handled that? What would that have been like for you? What would you have felt? You would have felt deep sorrow. You were expecting this king, this Messiah, to come so he could rule and take over this land and the city, and so he could sit on the throne. You could worship him as an earthly king, and those expectations were shot. And you're left with all of these feelings and emotions and unmet expectations because Friday is here. I don't know what your Friday is. You know what your Friday is. You know the things that you're struggling with right now in your life, in your relationships, in your finances, in your spiritual life, in your soul, in your mind. You know those things. I could sit up here and list a whiteboard full of stuff that for me, these are my Fridays, right? But the beauty of our story today is that we know Sunday is coming. Friday may be here with us right now, but Sunday is coming. What does that mean for us? Well, I think it means a couple of things. First, I think we've got to let go of our expectations of Jesus. Hear me out. Does that mean you shouldn't pray? No, you should keep praying. Does that mean you shouldn't be a part of the church and be in groups and serve and help people and love your neighbor? That doesn't mean, that's not what I'm talking about at all. Like you keep doing those things. And the difference is we let go of the expectations that we have for Jesus. Jesus did not come to fix all the things that are broken. Jesus came to give us something. So let go of those expectations that we put on Jesus and live in the moment and live in the reality of who Jesus was and is and will always be. You and I, because of the Bible, understand Friday may be happening, but Sunday is coming. That's why we invite people to take the step of baptism. Maybe you're here, you've been hearing us talk about baptism all year. Here's the deal. We're going to keep talking about baptism. You don't like it? Don't even try 5, right? Just go ahead. You did your 1, you can leave, or 5, or whatever. You're 600 times. Like, there's something powerful about baptism. We know that because of Scripture. Maybe for you, it's time for you to let go of whatever expectations you have of Jesus that you feel like Jesus isn't meeting, and it's holding you back from taking that step. Here's what I love. Easter's coming up. Easter's in a couple of weeks. And so we're doing baptisms on Easter Sunday. We'd love for you to be a part of that. There's a QR code in the seat in front of you. Take a picture of that. Click on the link tree there, and there's one that says Easter Baptism. Fill that out. You don't even have to get baptized. We can just answer questions for you. But we'd love to see you take that step in your spiritual journey because you're going to say, I'm going to let go of these expectations I have, and I'm going to live in the reality. I'm going to stop trying to see Jesus as just some fixer that I call on when I got a problem or I got an issue I need help. I'm going to live in the reality of who Jesus is. Jesus is this giver of life. When I think back to Chris's dad, and when he says this is a win-win situation, I don't lose either way. When we let go of those expectations and we give our life to Christ and we do everything we follow Jesus and we live in that reality, hey, guess what? It's a win-win situation for you